Nobody likes somebody making a video and saying, I told you so. Well, I'm not in this for popularity, so whether you like me or not, or like what I'm going to say, I don't really care. But I did tell you so. And Tommy told you so, and scores Anne-Marie Waters told you so, and Jared Batten told you, and everybody with even the slightest bit of courage and grey matter has been warning about what's come upon Parliament in the last week for years. I think the first time I spoke about Islam and Sharia was in 1998. When I came to Northern Ireland as a young soldier in 1987, lifetime ago, one of the things I noticed was that the sectarian divisions in Northern Ireland weren't anywhere near as bad as the sectarian divisions in my hometown of Middlesbrough in the 1980s, where there was a fairly substantial, probably a lot bigger now, but there was a fairly substantial Pakistani Muslim community that was not integrating at all and was starting to cause problems then. Now, that's the reality. People may be offended by that, but that's the reality of what we saw as young men on the ground. And my mates from Bradford were saying exactly the same thing. That was 1987. How much worse is that divide now? And of course, we look at what happened with the sectarian division in Northern Ireland. And I think in the same way in the 1960s that Northern Ireland was at a crossroads, I think the United Kingdom's at a crossroads now. And the crossroads is this: we either cave in to sectarianism, to Islamic fanaticism, or we stand up against it. Well, how do we stand up against it? We've tried the politics. We had a massive amount of influence with UKIP. Many of us joined UKIP. Jared Batten, great man. He got this. He understood this. And let's be honest, the powers that be in UKIP didn't want that happening. Mr. Farage went off and started his own party. They wouldn't even speak about this then. Farage wouldn't speak about it. Wouldn't speak about the subject. And even now, he speaks about it in very, very hushed tones. He talks about sectarianism. Why don't you just name the problem? It's not sectarianism. It's coming from one religious bloc, Mr. Farage. When you have the courage of your convictions and say where it's really coming from. Okay, so we know what the problem is. The problem obviously isn't just Islam. We've got the left, and I'm not talking about just the radical left. The whole of the Labour Party is compromised. There's an election coming up, and people think that we're going to have a Labour government. If we do, that will be disastrous for the United Kingdom. It'll be a total calamity. Okay? And we've also got the globalists who are running the Conservative Party, who would literally sell their granny to get a few more pounds in the bank. And, we've got an very prominent Conservative politician that is trying to do a deal to sell the Daily Telegraph to the Arabs. Now think about that. The most prominent right-wing newspaper in the country, one of the newspapers of record, being sold to Arabs, Muslim Arabs. If you think that's okay, if you think that's fine, if you think that's just commerce, that's up to you. I think it's a disaster for the UK. I mean, the Saudis bought the Independent, and, well, we all know where that's ended up. Anyway, the reality is everything in our country is compromised. Everything in our country is infiltrated either by the left, by Islamic radicals, or by the globalists. And nobody knows who the globalists are really working for. Is it the Chinese? Is it the Organization of Islamic Congress? We don't know. But there are massive powers at play in our country. And what's happening is the normal working people, people like me and you, we are feeling increasingly powerless. So what do? Well, the reality is that at the heart of this, and this is, I knew this when I started this, but but I'm coming back to it now, and I'm coming back to it with fervour. The reality is what we're facing in this country is a spiritual problem. Islam is a religion and a political ideology. It's both. It's religion and politics mixed into one, well, whatever you want to call it. But that's what it is. Islam is religion and politics fused and combined. And you end up with Sharia law. You end up with all the craziness that goes on in countries that are taken over by Islamic radicals. Look at the Taliban in Afghanistan, back to machine gunning people in the middle of football pitches. You know, I remember watching a woman in it was a documentary I think Channel 4 made, and it showed this woman being beheaded in the middle of a football pitch for adultery. Absolutely abhorrent. Absolutely abhorrent. That's what we're up against. So it's a spiritual problem and it's a political problem. So how do we deal with the spiritual problem? Well, all the new atheists, they must be very proud of themselves. People like Dawkins and obviously Christopher Hitchens. Well, he knows the truth now, right? But all the new atheists that peddled their poison, what was it, around the year 2000, 2001, it was whenever 9/11 happened, they got their day in the sun. All religion, this is because of all religion. No, it's because of one religion. And what's happened is the new atheists did a great job at undermining Christianity in the West. And of course, this wasn't just the new atheists. This has been going on for many, many years. But they've done a great job at turning Britain into a so-called secular country. And the problem is that creates a spiritual vacuum. And Islam has come in like a flood to fill that spiritual vacuum. And I spoke years ago. I called this a great army of darkness. The secularists, the atheists, the Islamists, the far left, the globalists, and it's destroyed the fabric of what the United Kingdom is. So the reality is the solution to a spiritual problem is a spiritual answer, and I'm not talking about everybody becoming Bible-believing Christians, as wonderful as that would be. I'm talking about people looking at the traditions of our country in terms of Christianity and looking at them as an impartial observer, whether you're an atheist, an agnostic, whatever your position is, and actually trying to understand our culture from a Christian point of view, because everything that our society was built on came from the Bible. Whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, isn't the issue. I'm not trying to convert anyone here. I'm saying everything good about our country came out of the Bible. Human rights came out of the Bible. You know, man's made in the image of God. Good law and order came out of the Bible. The Ten Commandments. Go and read. I mean, I would guess that probably less than 10% of the British population could tell you every single one of the Ten Commandments without having to go and look it up. Just a guess. And I say a lot of people in the church probably wouldn't know all the Ten Commandments either. The Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus talks about loving your enemies, being meek, being gentle, you know, the things that made Britain what it was. Britain was a gentle, generous, peaceful, tolerant country, not because of secularism, not because of the Enlightenment, but because of the Bible and because of the Church of England and Christianity. How many people still know the Lord's Prayer? Probably very, very few. So what I'm saying in this video is we have a spiritual problem. Yes, we have a political problem, but there's a spiritual answer to the spiritual problem. When a man turns his back on God, the fallout from that is a disaster for him and a disaster for everybody that he cares about. That's a reality. And if you've ever turned your back on God, you'll find out that that's very, very true. Everything falls apart, including your own, I don't know whether you call it mental health or whatever you want to call it these days, but everything falls apart. And it's exactly the same with the country. There's a verse I think it's in Proverbs, that says the wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. And our nation has forgotten God and turned its back on God. And like I say, I'm not preaching, because I am not in any position to preach at anyone, because, you know, well, we all have our personal issues, and that's all I'm going to say about me. So I'm not pointing the finger at anybody or at anything, but what I'm saying is our nation is facing a spiritual problem, And that spiritual problem is because our nation has turned away from Christianity and turned away from God. And when I'm going to do some more videos on this, because what I don't want to do is go on too long. But that is basically the problem. And like I say, I will do more videos going into a lot more depth on this and what we do to restore ourselves as a country and restore our communities. I'm going to talk a lot about faith, family, and flag, because they're literally what makes a nation strong. Strong faith, strong families, and a strong sense of national identity and community. Anyway, that's a bit longer than I wanted it to be, but I think it's important to get that out there and to nail my colours to the mast and say, this is what I think the problem is. And I think I'm part of the problem as much as anybody else. So I'm not preaching at anyone. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone, because I know very, very well how easy it is to turn your back on God, and it doesn't end well. It really doesn't end well. Anyway, that's a little video. Hopefully it's helpful to you. That's what it's all about. This isn't about basically ranting and raving. It's about trying to give solutions to very real problems that our country's facing. I'm going to knock the comments off on this, because I know whenever you talk about religion, you get all the idiots, and I can't be bothered with you if you're going to put on negative stuff about God and about religion. So there's not going to be any comments on this. But yeah, I just think this has got to be said, and I'm going to do a lot more videos on this. I might even set up a separate channel to focus on this really, what I think is a really important issue of how we can actually save our country from what I think is going to be a disaster unless something pretty miraculous happens.